1 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 12 to 13. If you think you are standing strong, be careful not to fall. The temptations in your life are no different from what others experience, and God is faithful. He will not allow the temptation to be more than you can stand. When you are tempted, He will show you a way out so that you may be able to endure it. A key word in those verses are that you may be able to endure it. See, people always use this verse like God won't give you more than you can handle, which is all well and good when you're on the good side of things. But when you're the person hearing that phrase, it doesn't usually help. Because when things are bad and when you're sorely tempted, it's like, where is God? Why are all these things happening? Because it says He will not allow the temptation to be more than you can stand. And that's because He is there to pick up the slack, to fill in the gaps. He is there for us to go to Him and say, hey, we're struggling. I'm struggling with this temptation. I'm struggling to break the bonds of this sin. I'm struggling to see how you're working. I'm struggling to see your goodness through all this bad stuff that is happening. And then God will give us a way out. I know I've experienced it many times. When I've struggled with depression and anxiety my entire life. And there was a time period in my late teens and early 20s where the depression was so bad I started to self-harm on and off. And the last time that I self-harmed was actually the same day that God called me to be a youth minister. I was at a Church of God of Prophecy youth convention, young adult convention, and the person that I went with was very extroverted and outgoing, bubbly. Everyone always instantly loved her. She never knew a stranger kind of person. She's very sweet and down to earth. And I've just always kind of had the fear, anxiety on my face where I'm better than I used to be, but at that time I was incredibly not approachable. And the whole time we were there, the first day and a half, she made friends. People talked to her. She talked back. And I just kind of stood there not knowing what to say to people. And people weren't acknowledging me. And I took that personally because that's what happens when you're in a bad mental state. It's really easy to take things personally and to just contort what's really happening. It's like the opposite of rose-colored glasses. It's like very dark shades of everything. And she got invited to like this I think they called it afterglow. And it was basically it was like one from midnight to 2 a.m. where all of, the young people who wanted to would gather, and there'd be like Christian music playing and some refreshments and fellowship and games and all this stuff. And they told her to come on, let's go. And then she looked back at me and she's like, oh, you want to come too? And I felt like such an afterthought, even though she meant it sincerely, that I went back to our hotel room, and for the first time in what had been a long time, I took my hair straightener and I had burned my forearm. And the whole time I felt like I should have gone with her. I had that strong feeling, but I allowed anxiety and fear and the devastation I felt by how I was perceiving everything to hold me back when God was giving me a way out. God was using her to try to tell me that I am welcome, that she accepts me for who I was at that time and what I was struggling with. And I didn't take that way out. Even when I got back to the hotel room, I just had this strong urge that I shouldn't be there. I shouldn't be alone. But I didn't listen to it. And my friend ended up coming back to the hotel room early because, once again, God provided a way, and she had a bad feeling. And she came in shortly after I did that. And then we both broke down and cried together, and I explained things that I had gone through and how it affected me. And God was able, because she listened to God and provided a way for me to climb out of my depression episode that I was in, I was able to start the whole next day fresh. And instead of clinging to her like I was doing out of fear, I actually looked at the different workshops and went to the ones God led me to. And I spoke up in Q&As and things like that, and I interacted. And I felt like an entirely new person. And that could have happened sooner if I'd taken the way out that God had. Because, again, people think, well, God can't give you more than I can handle, so I'm overwhelmed by the bad stuff happening. I'm overwhelmed by the sin that I'm trapped in. So that's not true, but it is. We just sometimes are so blind or so stubborn that we don't take the way or see the way that he has given us to take us out of the situation. And there's a story that Robert Schmigdal shared. It was about this classroom in Ohio State University. It was several years ago. There was a huge lecture hall that held about 1,000 students, and it was for a calculus final. Apparently, the particular calculus teacher was not very well liked. He was one of those guys who would stand in front of his class and yell out how much time remaining before the end of a test. A real charmer. Since he was so busy gallivanting around the room, making sure nobody cheated and that everyone was aware of how much time they had left before their failure on the test was complete, he had the students stack the completed tests on the huge podium in front of them. This made for quite a mess. Remember, there were 1,000 students in this class. During this particular final, one guy entered the test needing a decent grade to pass the class. His only problem with calculus was that he did poorly when he was rushed, and this guy standing in front of the room barking out how much time was left before the test had to be handed in did not help him whatsoever. He figured he wanted to assure himself of a good grade, so he hardly flinched when the professor said, "Pencils down, submit your Scranton sheets and work piles to the front of the room." 5 minutes turned into 10, 10 into 20, 20 into 40, and almost an hour after the test was officially over, our friend finally put down his pencil, gathered up his work, and headed to the front of the hall to submit his final. The whole time, the professor sat at the front of the room, strangely waiting for the student to complete his exam. "What do you think you're doing?" the professor asked as the student stood in front of him, about to put down his exam on one of the neatly stacked piles of exams. The professor had plenty of time to stack the mountains of papers while he waited. It was clear the professor had only waited to give this student a hard time. "Turning in my exam," retorted the student confidently. "I'm afraid I have some bad news for you," the professor gloated. "Your exam is an hour late. You've failed it, consequently. I'll see you next term when you repeat my course." The student smiled slyly and asked the professor, "Do you know who I am?" "What?" replied the professor gruffly, annoyed that the student showed no sign of emotion. The student rephrased the question mockingly. "Do you know what my name is?" "No," snarled the professor. The student looked the professor dead in the eyes and said slowly, "I didn't think so," as he lifted up one of the stacks halfway, shoved his test neatly into the center of the stack, let the stack fall, burying his test in the middle, turn around, and walk casually out of the lecture hall. He chose to focus on what he needed to do to surpass the pressure, to do what needed to be done to pass the class. He recognized he had the intelligence, he had the capability. It was the pressure that got to him, so he found a way around it. And that's what our Christian walk is. Got to have some kind of balance. When things hit us, our knee-jerk reaction is to get worried or angry, confused. all sorts of negative emotions that we don't see a way out. It's like I can't see the forest for the trees kind of deal. But the thing is, there's always a way out. It might not be pleasant, and you might not think you'll get to the other side. It might not look like the way that you wanted things to happen, but God's plans are not our plans. If his plans were, my plan in particular, I would not be here. This is not the plan I had for my life whatsoever. And honestly, and I know this sounds like such a cliche, but I mean this with all my heart and soul. Through all the trauma, trials, struggle, dark things that I've seen and heard and went through, and all of that pain, it brought me my husband, it brought me my child, it brought me the friends that I have and the relationships I have with some family members, and real connection with God. Not just the surface, I go to church on Sunday and that's it. And sometimes I do small groups and that's it. But to really have that deep relationship where it's personal, to talk to him, and not think that you have to have these lofty phrases and quote, his own scripture at him, but to just genuinely talk to him and come to him no matter what's going on, good or bad or in between. In Romans 15:14 it says, the scriptures often exhort us to be filled with various godly virtues, which means what? How do we know we are full of goodness, like it says in Romans 15:14, for example? Think a moment about a water-saturated sponge. If we push down with our finger even slightly, water runs out onto the table. We immediately know what fills the interior pockets of the sponge. The same is true of ourselves. We can tell what fills us on the inside by what comes out under pressure. I know one phrase that was super popular when I was growing up, like in church and Christian school and all that, was the garbage in, garbage out theory. That if you're, watching and listening to things and reading things that have like a lot of cussing and violence and stuff like that, then when it comes to being under pressure, it's so much easier to cuss, react violently, or maybe not violently, but like react with rage instead of, with your head and taking a moment. In fact, God, just bringing this to my mind, I probably shared this before, but this is a bit of a different angle. When I was in high school, the football coach, he had BWG on Wednesdays, which was Breakfast with God, where you come into school early, he would provide some kind of breakfast, and we just talk. Sometimes there would be a theme, sometimes there wouldn't be, but everyone was always engaged. I always really look forward to that. And there was one time, and I felt so refreshing, because there are a lot of times, growing up, that it was, people had the idea, like, you're a child, you can't have an opinion. But there was a general, good debate that I had specifically with him in front of everybody when he said that there was no such thing as Christian rock music, that it's still garbage in, so it's going to be garbage out. And we had a friendly debate. I may have gotten a little heated, but nothing and because I grew up listening to a lot of rock music, and there was a lot of times when, if that was all I listened to, especially specific bands, I found myself getting really snappy, having a bad attitude, and not caring and all this stuff like that. But when I listened to Christian rock bands like Skillet and others that are not coming to my mind right now, that had these messages of faith and holding on, and how things look bleak on this earth, but we can have hope in Jesus. It just happened to have a lot of guitars, the singer had a rough voice, and a lot of drums and things like that. But when I listened to that, I felt not just hope, but I felt really, worked up in a good way, and like a fire was lit inside of me, because that's the kind of music that appeals to me, but it also appealed to my spirit because of the lyrics. And that's why we need to be careful of the things that we take in, who we, pour our time in, because yes, we're supposed to love our neighbors as ourselves 100%, and we're supposed to care for people. But sometimes, because we are not perfect, there are people that we can hang out with, and the more that we spend time with them, the more we notice that we get negative gossip and things like that. And if you can recognize, hey, I don't really like the person that I am around this particular person, and I don't know if I'm strong enough to combat that, then it's time to love them at a distance until God changes things, whether it makes you stronger or the other person change of heart, whatever the case may be. And we got to take in, how we talk to people, how we talk to ourselves, things that we watch and read and listen to, the things that we spend our time on, because those focuses that we have are going to come out. There are times where I've either forgone devotions or spent little time with devotion and prayer and focused most of my time on, reading or a video game or TV. And, next thing I know, I have a very weak connection to God, which is better than none. But I found myself getting more irritable and not relying on God and trying to do things on my own and things not working out. And the more that we rely on Him, and I'm not saying that secular movies, TV, and music are bad, because it's not. But when it becomes, that temptation and that priority, that, it's the same thing that when, you're parenting in this day and age, does your, your phone or your tablet prioritize, do you pay attention to that more than you do your kid? Or do you, just put your kid in front of, an iPad or something like that to keep them quiet so you can do what you want to do? In 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 3-5, it says, "We are human, but we don't wage war as humans do. We use God's mighty weapons, not worldly weapons, to knock down the strongholds of human reasoning and to destroy false arguments. We destroy every proud obstacle that keeps people from knowing God. We capture their rebellious thoughts and teach them to obey Christ." I want to elaborate, the importance, and I know I've said this in several sermons, but I can't stress enough the importance of a personal relationship with God. Because I'm also not bashing parents who need to have, their kid occupied in some way so they get some peace. But you need to have that focus on realizing when things are going out of balance. When it's less for so they can calm down and so you can have peace, and it's more it gets to the point where it's just so much where all they want to do is the iPad and all you want to do is ignore. That's the line that I'm talking about. We need to stay connected to the vine and think, just as that professor raged war against his students instead of helping them like he's supposed to do, for whatever reason he chose not to, so the devil and his army rages against each and every human being, trying to distract and tear down, immobilize, influence. There is a spiritual battle going on around us constantly, which is why we're constantly, even when we're in a good place with God, where things will happen to cause us to stumble. I mean, look at Job. He lost all his children, and his wife told him to just curse and die. He got curse God and die, and he got all these boils. He had so many horrible things happen to him, but he never renounced God, which is incredible. Because even just one of those things would make, I feel like, the strongest Christian very weak in their faith. Sometimes we get so busy with the things of life, especially in this day and age, because everything is so instantaneous and self-gratification, and there's so many different things to do that trying to find the time to just pause and rest in the Lord, it feels sometimes impossible. And when that happens, we need to start reprioritizing and making our time with God a priority. Because if our spirit is connected to Him and is enriched by Him, then we'll be able to better face those trials that happen, and to face the temptations, and to walk away, to go down the way that God has made away from it. In John chapter 16, verse 33, it says, I have told you all this so that you may have peace in me. Here on earth you will have many trials and sorrows, but take heart, because I have overcome the world. The way is clear sometimes. Sometimes it's like a neon sign is lit up. This is the way God is trying to direct you. But our vision sometimes is too clouded to see it, or we're too filled with fear to follow it. We cannot expect God's guidance and blessings and to reach the next level of our lives if we do not resist succumbing to the pressure of the enemy and insist on resting on the peace of God that He so wants to give us at all times, especially in times of trouble. He is just waiting there for us to stop being stubborn, afraid, whatever the case may be, and to give it to Him. And that doesn't mean that your situation is going to change automatically, but it does mean you won't be carrying the burden alone. It means you will be able to better see the way through what you're going through. Philippians chapter 4, verses 10 through 13 says, How I praise the Lord that you are concerned about me again. I know you have always been concerned for me, but you didn't have the chance to help me. Not that I was ever in need, for I have learned how to be content with whatever I have. I know how to live on almost nothing or with everything. I have learned the secret of living in every situation, whether it is with a full stomach, empty, with plenty, or little. For I can do everything through Christ who gives me strength. People like to hang on to that last part. I can do all things through Christ strengthens me. And they use it as motivation, for like, I can do all things. I can keep practicing, and get good at this sport. I can do great things in the Lord. I can lead this. I can get a part of that. And we think in terms of like just leveling up when it says all things, and that means the bad things too, that we can get over or get through the bad times because God will strengthen us. We can get through our temptations and resist them whenever they come up. Because yes, there are people out there that have struggled with alcoholism and drugs and other such things that when they get connected to God, free, clear, and sober, never go back again. But there are other people, and it's not even just that. There are all kinds of things that will hinder your relationship, with God and hinder your spirit and weigh you down. And sometimes, God will help you through it, and then it just crops back up again, and it makes you question yourself, it makes you question God. But God is the same yesterday, today, and forevermore. Hebrews 13:8. He will still get you through the temptation. He doesn't think any less of you. He's not trying to strike you down. It's just another opportunity for Him to see how strong that He is. We need to let go of that unbearable weight of whatever pressure that you're under. Don't get frustrated if it's heavily repeated process either, because any progress in God is good progress. Even if you backslid and then you come back, God is not there to, be there with guilt and be like, so you fell into that trap again. So you backed away from me and now you're back. That's not how God is. And he showed us that in the parable about the prodigal son, because the prodigal son went, hog wild and took his inheritance and went away with his family and did all sorts of horrible things. And then when he was broken and realized that he was wrong, when he got back, his father didn't say anything negative to him. He was there with open arms to accept him, and then had this big feast to celebrate his return. That is God telling us that's what it's like for him. That the guilt and the shame that we feel is supposed to compel us to go to him and take it and drop it at his feet and ask for forgiveness, and then it's done. Until the next time you need to go, and then it's done. And God does not throw it back up in our face. We do that to ourselves, and other people will gladly do it for us sometimes too. But God is not human. Thank God. Romans 8:28. And we know that God causes everything to work together for the good of those who love God and are called according to his purpose for them. If you accept Christ into your heart, if you are following him, God is going to cause things to work together. The trauma that you've been through in the past, he's going to make you stronger and help you through it, to process it and be stronger, to help you be put into other people's lives, to help them through the experience that you've had. He's going to take, the times where you didn't know how you were going to get through, and the times of wanting where your faith was there, but food and money was not. And God is going to get you on the other side, because he is going to bring people into your life that will help you, that will encourage you, that you can in turn do the same, because he says in his word that we are to be, iron sharpening iron, to be there for each other, to help each other, encourage each other, and lift each other up. And God will use whoever. He'll use people, he'll use animals, he'll use anything to show you that he is there. He is the same. His love is always there, and so is his forgiveness and mercy. And his way out of our despair, our anxiety, our depression, our temptation, our rough times, the peace of his that goes beyond all understanding is there. We just have to allow him into our life, allow him to take the proverbial scales off our eyes so we can see it.